Hi, I'm Leo Bottary, founder and managing partner of Peernovation LLC. I work with peer advisory groups all over the world to help them maximize the value of their experience. I also work with CEOs and key executives to take what these peer advisory groups have been doing so brilliantly for so long and look at how to take those principles into the teams in your organization. With that, we're going to hit on a topic today that may seem very obvious to many of you, right? Especially if you're a part of a TEC Canada group, because you already understand the value of asking for help. You know that that's what successful people do. What's interesting, though, is for many of your employees, that might not be the case at all. And it may not even be the case for many of your senior team. So it's actually a topic that I think you may find, interesting in that regard. And we're going to try to break it down today to talk a little bit about how we can make asking for help not only an acceptable part of what to do in the organization, but I think really understood as a preferred way for a team to really work together effectively, and for a group as well, of course. It comes out of basically a question that I started asking when I went to be working with teams. And I would say, how does asking for help make you feel? And I use this tool called Mentimeter, where they can populate a poll question and create a word cloud right in the room, and it just fills while it's there. And so I asked people these questions and asked it of many teams. And I'm going to show you a word cloud from one team that I think is pretty representative of what I see. And here it is. When I asked them, how does asking for help make you feel? Look at the words they selected: awkward, troublesome, uncertain, anxious, stupid, humbled, weak. In a couple of cases, you have people who may say it makes them feel good, or it makes them feel like asking for help shows respect for others, or it's about learning. But overwhelmingly, the feelings that people have about asking for help are not great. And I think it's something really worth exploring. And this is why we're going to spend some time on this today and think about all the different ways we can come at this. So see what we could do for ourselves and for our organizations as well. And maybe just in life in general about asking for help and what that can mean. Now, common reasons we don't ask for help, I think they're all going to be pretty familiar to us, right? One, it can make us feel needy or incapable, just like the people indicated in that word cloud. Two, it often involves compromise and control. Now, all of a sudden, once I've invited someone else into whatever it is I'm doing, then that becomes something that may make me feel uneasy. Three, we don't want to be a burden to others. We're thinking, oh, that person doesn't have the time to help me with this, and you're not wanting to impose on other people. Certainly understandable. Four, it can make us feel indebted, right? Because if all of a sudden we ask for help, now all of a sudden there's some expectation of how are we going to return the favor. And then five, of course, it competes with our idea of the self-made man or woman, that somehow you've got these people that we imagine who just did it all by themselves, and that's that. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later as well. An exercise that I've done many times with large groups, and this is a group, by the way, that I spoke to in Portugal a number of years ago. And what I would do in this session is I would ask, how many sports fans do we have up there? You'll have a whole bunch of hands go up and all of that. And I'll pick one person and I'll say, would you mind standing up for me? And the person stands up and I'll say, I'd love it if you would tell me your favorite sports team. And in this case, we're in Portugal, so it was the Portuguese soccer team at the time. And they said, yeah, Portugal, for soccer. And I said, great. Or, of course, football, I should imagine. But I said, okay, let's do this. Here you are, you're standing there. I want you to imagine that you are in the stadium. It's the World Cup final. And you are seconds away from essentially having Portugal win the World Cup. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, 0. And I want you to behave exactly as you would if you were in the stadium that day. And so it's funny because even for the most extroverted, they're like, well, okay, great. I got to do this in front of everybody. So, but of course I count down 3, 2, 1, 0 and they clap and they yell and they jump up and down and they make a nice spectacle of it all as they would had that moment taken place. And then of course we stop down, we give the person a round of applause, but then I say, okay, I want everyone else to join them. So now that person has this whole group of people around. and I ask every one of them to essentially participate in the same exercise. I count down 3, 2, 1, 0. And as you might imagine, kaboom, just blows the roof off the place with this thunderous applause. And so then we settle everyone down and we all sit back and all. And I said, it's so interesting, because metaphorically speaking, we can often feel as if we have to fill the room with sound all by ourselves and we don't ask for help. And yet when you get help, you can get an exponentially, stronger result. And by the way, that person who had to do it in front of everyone, it feels very self-conscious. When everyone had to do it together, it was just a whole lot of fun. So again, you can not only get a better result, but I think you can get a lot more enjoyment out of doing so. So it's kind of an interesting illustration for them about what we're talking about when we really speak to asking for help. Now, with that as our backdrop here, I want to offer just a bit of an overview of what we want to cover today. One is I'm going to just get into the source material, talk a bit about some of the research in the books and all of that, inform some of this work. Second is how early it starts in our lives, right? Third, who you surround yourself with matters, right? I'm pretty sure that a lot of our, parents out there were really concerned about who our friends are. We're growing up, the kids that were good influences and maybe not so much. 4, dispelling the myths around asking for help. 5, what it means for great teams and why the greatest teams see asking for help as such an incredibly powerful part of their culture and who they are. 6, changing your mindset through better framing. Sometimes it isn't just the idea of asking for help, it's how we go about it. And can we frame it in a way that kind of tricks our brain into making us feel a heck of a lot better about it? 7, asking for help is absolutely not a sign of weakness. And we want to get to that, very clearly by the end of this. But again, we've got to reframe that a bit as well. 8, that the power of we begins with you. And it begins with each of us. Now, to get into the source material a little bit here, there are 3 books that I've written basically since 2016, the research for which started years and years before, and a lot of academic research, field work, and all of that basically tackled 3 different subjects, or 3 different topics on the same subject, I should really say. The first on the left is the power of peers. It looked at high-performing peer groups and how and why they're so incredibly effective for CEOs and business leaders. What happens when they work together and what the benefits truly are. The second book on the far right was called What Anyone Can Do. And What Anyone Can Do essentially looked at not just our formal peer groups, but our family, our friends, our kids, our parents, our teachers, our mentors, our mentees, all the people who surround us in our life, to basically say that if we did a better job of enlisting and engaging their support, then all of us could be all the better for it, and be all that more successful and achieve what we want out of our lives. And third is Peernovation. And I'm writing the second edition of this book right now. It'll be done in another month or so. As I sit here in early December of 2024. And basically looking at, after visiting about 700 peer groups and working with them very closely, how to take what these peer groups do so well and apply the principles to the teams in your company and in your organization. So I'm going to take a few moments and a few occasions here to define some terms, because I think it's going to be really helpful to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page and speaking the same language. So when I think about groups and teams, I see groups as convening to help members achieve their individual goals. So when you're a member of a TEC Canada group, for example, you're there because you may want to be a better leader, or you may want to learn something about how you can run your company more effectively so you can be of service to others. Teams are not really wired to do that. Teams essentially work together toward achieving a collective goal. Could be winning a Stanley Cup final, or creating a shared work product, like a huge advertising campaign that involves people from a lot of different disciplines in order to contribute to making that campaign successful. Now, as we look at it, the implications for groups and teams, I also want to get into kind of really start early, right, in terms of how early this starts for all of us. So I want to share a story about my daughter, Taylor. Now, to be crystal clear here, this is not a recent photograph of Taylor. Taylor is 34 years old. She was 6.5 when this photo was taken, and she was 4.5 when I picked her up from childcare. One night, it was Halloween, about 5:30 p.m. I walked into her childcare, and the woman sitting at the front desk, and I said, "Is Taylor ready to go home?" And the woman says, "Just a second, the director would like to have a word with you." And I'm like, "Oh, excellent," right? Because when the director wants to have a word with you at the end of the night, it's not typically great news. They just want to get the kids out of there. But in this case, the director walks out. She's got this huge smile on her face. Said, "I've got to tell you what happened today. We had a party for the kids, little crafts and treats and music and all. And we thought it would be fun to have this woman dress up as a witch and come and entertain the little ones." Well, sure enough, the witch arrives on the scene and the kids just went nuts. I mean, they were like scared to death, running around crying and screaming and doing everything else. Teachers are trying to calm everyone down. Well, in the midst of all this, Taylor runs to the front of the room. She makes herself real big and says, "It's okay. She's not real. There's no need to be afraid." The kids are looking at her and they're looking at one another and whatever, and they collect themselves. They go back to the around where they were sitting. The witch stays and everything proceeded as scheduled. So, of course, as a dad hearing this story, though, it's not like I ever sat my 4.5-year-old down and said, "Hey, if the kids in your class ever get upset, step up and be a leader," right? That's on you. But in this case, it's kind of interesting based on what happened. It kind of made me really think about it from the perspective of what caused all those kids to get so upset. What was it that day? And when I bring this question to CEO peer groups or key executive groups, the most common responses, at least initially, I'll get, well, it was fear and it was uncertainty and it was this expectations of who witches are and what they do and all that, all of which are correct, certainly. But what ended up really causing the mass hysteria, I would submit, would be that first kid who starts to cry. Triggers the second, triggers the third, and it spreads like wildfire among those kids. We look to one another in those moments of fear and uncertainty. We always have. And we continue to do it, today as adults. Now, what's interesting, though, also is that I think, of course, the teachers would have restored order eventually. But I would also suggest that it probably happened a little bit faster because one of their own said, "I think we're good here. I think we're okay." Now, one of the reasons I share this story, by the way, is that this basically happens in your companies all the time. Minus the screaming and crying, I hope, although I have a lot of CEOs that go, "Oh, no, we have all that too. We have all the drama and everything goes with it." Because every time you announce any kind of new change initiative, could be a new policy, new strategy, or anything like that, it's not as if, the people hear this information and go about their business and that's it. What they do is they engage in sense-making exercises in the same way those kids did in Taylor's classroom, right? They look to one another and they're asking each other, do we like this? We don't like it. Is it good? Is it bad? Do we think it's going to work? It's not going to work, right? Boy, we had a big announcement a year ago. 30 days later, no one was talking about it anymore. So are we to dive into this with both feet, or how are we going to respond here? And I think it's really interesting for leaders to kind of look beyond the vertical construct of their organizations when they have their executive leadership team and their senior VPs and directors and managers and all that. And they start seeing the horizontal dynamics that are at work. Because when I sit down with CEOs and key execs, and I also say to them, "Hey, do you have people in your organization who aren't necessarily the most senior level, but they're really influential with other employees?" What do you think they say? Of course we do. We know exactly who they are. So now I suggest to them, think about the next time you have a change initiative that comes up. How do you enlist and identify who they are, enlist and engage their support, right? Maybe you get some input in advance. Maybe they talk to you about how to message this among the ranks that, would be, a powerful and positive way to do it. Short of that, you at least want to make sure they understand the why, because not if, but when these sense-making exercises take place, you want those ambassadors in those conversations. You want to make sure that your employees are given whatever it is you're trying to do a fair shot. I read a thing from McKinsey, and I've seen some other reports on this as well, that in many cases, even though organizational change and other things like this don't always have the greatest track record, in many cases, it isn't because the policy was so bad or some strategy was so ill-conceived. It's because you couldn't get your people behind it to the degree necessary to really give it a fair chance. And I think that is something that really worth thinking about and worth experimenting with for sure. Now, When we think about peer influence, and again, I want to define some terms here too, and to make sure that we're speaking the same language. It's the impact the people who surround us can have in shaping our behavior. Much like what we talked about with how those kids in Taylor's classroom and what happens in the workplace. But when we're more intentional about it, we can experience something called peer advantage. And this is what's realized when we're more selective, strategic, and structured about the people who surround us. It's what you do when you hire the people in your company. It is certainly what you do when you select a peer group to be part of and that they select you. Everyone is really being, very careful about making sure that this is a great fit and that everyone's helping each other achieve what they're there to do. When we achieve this, though, at a really high level, this is when we experience peernovation. Now, peernovation combines the words peer, people of like status, and innovation, creativity realized. It's essentially, what occurs when a carefully selected, diverse collection of people with a common purpose and shared values work together to make each other better and create something larger than themselves. Now, whether that's a group situation or a team situation, it applies certainly to both. Now, as we talked about earlier in the overview, who you surround yourself with matters. I'm pretty sure everybody who's listening today can think about people who maybe had a positive difference, peers who had a positive influence in their lives. But I bet just about every one of us can think about those one or two or more people who kind of led us astray from time to time. And I think that's always kind of worth thinking about as well. I basically want to share a story from a conference that I attended, and it was that same conference in Portugal, actually, that I brought up earlier, where Miguel Diaz invited me, Raphael Gordon, and Ryan Foland to come speak. And when he did, he asked us, I guess he knew something about the fact that we did some running or whatever. And he said, what do you think about going for a run through Porto? And that'll give us a little tour of the city and all that. I said, great. So years ago, I used to run a lot of marathons, and there's nothing more I loved than when I had training runs and I was on the road and I'd tour a city basically. And it was such a great way to discover new things and experience, what it was all about. So we were all in. We said, okay, this would be fantastic. So anyway, we get together that morning. We had all flown basically all night long, but we were just, okay, we're up, we're ready to go. And off we go. Well, there's a key question that I didn't ask and none of us asked Miguel, which was, how far are we going? And this, as we would find out, became really, really important because and we talked about this after, that how far did you think we were going today if you just had to guess? Well, probably like a 5K, 3.1 miles, right? Turns out we ran 14K that day. Now, if you had come to any one of us, either individually or even collectively that morning and said, hey, we're going to go on a 14K run now. We said, hey, knock yourself out. We'll see you after breakfast. But anyway, off we go. And that was that. This was a photo taken of us, or we did the selfie here at the halfway mark. We had basically run 7K downhill, which means what? The other 7K, we had to go all the way back uphill. So we run this 14K. Again, this was at the halfway mark, all with smiles on our faces for whatever reason, because we were all, even then, I think, getting pretty tired. But anyway, we did. We had fun. We laughed. We pushed each other. We encouraged each other. We did all the kinds of things that would have, I believe, and I think every one of those guys, maybe except Miguel on that day, would have made that run impossible if we all were just left to our own devices to do it. So there's really something to be said about the people you surround yourself, the influence you have. And by the way, like a lot of things like that, all of those guys, I have still a great relationship with them today. And I attribute it in large part to that shared experience that we enjoyed on our run in Porto. Now, here's another just twist on this, because I think that there are certain myths associated with asking for help that aren't always great. The people pictured on the screen here are all really successful in their respective fields. And they were extraordinary people who I interviewed as part of a podcast in 2017. And it was called The Year of the Peer, largely because I gave me a good exit strategy from podcasting at the time. But there were two myths that they really dispelled in a very big way. One is the notion that anyone is self-made. By the way, I asked every one of these people, did you become successful all by yourself? And they all laughed at the idea. They said, of course not. It's ridiculous. There are countless people that have helped me get to where I am today. People I will never be able to thank, which, by the way, makes them very inclined to want to pay it forward to others. So I do some adjunct professor work for Rutgers University. And I tell my students today, never be afraid to reach out and try to see if someone might spend 15 minutes on the phone with you or in a Zoom call or something like that, because you'd be amazed at how they will look at that. If they have the time, they are happy to help those people, just like, the people who help them. And so I think there's a real spirit of generosity around this, but every one of them recognizes that, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's an act of resourcefulness, and it's what successful people do. And I think once we can wrap our heads around that, then that becomes, I think, really, really important, and why dispelling this particular myth is really helpful. The second myth they dispelled was, if you want it done right, do it yourself. Excuse me. This is another, key thing here, because first of all, what does right mean? Well, right is what we think it means. And put a team of photographers, for example, in a certain outdoor scenario where there's various landscape, and it could be in the mountains, could be at the ocean, could be anywhere, and ask them to shoot photos. You will find a lot of right answers in those photos based on the lens they used, the perspective they had, the moments they were able to capture, all of these kinds of things. When you're in a peer group, oftentimes you realize that there are ways of doing things in your industry that you may find, you relied on them. It's what everyone in your industry does. But when you pick your head up outside of your company and outside of your industry sector and kind of get exposed to how other people in other industries do things, and you discover, wow, that's a process that you do and that maybe everyone does, in your field, that no one does in my field at all. And by the way, that could work for us and maybe be a competitive differentiator. So I think this idea of, people, when we get people and working with those who we trust and those who we know are good and can offer different perspectives, they're going to help us do things not only right and show us the different right ways, but I think they're going to help us do it better. Now, the power of we begins with each of us. Here's where I want to speak to a bit of the application on teams here. There's something that I'll call the help triad, for the purposes of this work here today, where it basically doesn't have a huge hierarchy or anything like that. In fact, it is everyone connected. You'll see here that the leader is a part of the team, not apart from it. That you've got the member, the team, and the leader, all with a shared responsibility to, quite frankly, ask each other for help and achieve whatever result that they're there, designed to do. So, the leader will ask for help from an individual team member or the team itself. The team will ask the leader or pick or select an individual member who has a particular expertise that can come to the forefront, where that member may not be the leader of the team, but they will be a leader in the team in that moment. And the more that they understand that we are all in this together and that we are all about asking each other for help, and that's how we're going to be the most effective, that's really hugely helpful, right? One of the exercises that I have worked with many companies on is this little game called Toss Me Some Feedback. And it's a whole lot of fun. I bring a bunch of cornhole games and actually just leave them for the teams when they're done. And they can give them away as prizes. They can do things like that. But there's 4 people on a team. There's a person who's throwing the cornhole bags, a person who is catching them on the other end. There's a person next to the person who's throwing the cornholes who kind of receives those when they are retrieved. And the reason for that is because the person who's throwing the cornhole bags is blindfolded. Okay. And then you have a 4th person in the team who keeps score. So for the first 5 minutes, you have this 4-person team where you go, all right, go, you've got 5 minutes, and with no input at all, the person who's blindfolded has to throw as many into the center in the cornhole as possible, right? And obviously that becomes very difficult to do over that period of time. In the next 5-minute segment, their teammates are allowed to ask, the person who is throwing the cornhole bags is allowed to ask yes or no questions to his teammate or her teammate. So in other words, if I throw the cornhole bag, is it too long, too short? Is it left? Is it right? And I get less yes and no, and I at least get some kind of guidance around what to do. Well, obviously the results in that instance become a lot better. Option 3, the entire team can engage proactively in letting you know firing any suggestions, any thoughts, ideas that will help you increase your score. And of course they do. And a lot of the suggestions are pretty amazing. In fact, one of the times I recall someone said, just take all 4 of them and throw them all at once. And they did. And you got like 3 of them out of 4, like out of that one toss. And it was like, well, that was kind of a cool suggestion, something that the person who's blindfolded is throwing, it's not going to do, but something that came to them and ended up increasing their score. At the end of it, I think it's pretty extraordinary when people realize that they don't want to be that person when they're working on a project and feel like they're the person with the blindfold on. They also recognize that when we have a collective goal and when we're all bought into wanting to achieve that goal and we trust one another that this is really what we're looking to do, that we need to rely on each other to make that happen. And I think that when people offer help, ask for help, or give and take feedback, it's done from that place of caring. It's done from that place of serving one another in service of our craft and our customers and our clients or our vendor, whatever audience it may have to be. And I think that becomes a very important kind of illustration for them or demonstration even to engage in. Now, 2 teams that I think of who have extraordinary cultures around asking for help and around communications would be the University of Connecticut women's basketball team, one of the top programs in the U.S. in all of college sports, whether it's men or women. Extraordinary culture of asking for help, and not just during the games, all the time, on the floor, everything from strength training to shooting to playing defense to doing all the things, and the communication level and what they do and how they trust one another and how they lean into the roles that they need to play to be successful on that team become really important. The second one on your right is an advertising agency, Mullen Lowe, headquartered out of London. Mullen Lowe is an extraordinary advertising agency. A lot of individual talent, a lot of egos, and a lot of that, as you might imagine, in a setting like that, but an unbelievable understanding that to create the best advertising in the world, we have to do it together. There's just no question about that. We have to lean on one another. We have to understand all the gifts that everyone brings to the table so that we can assemble the right team and we can all bring our very best. Sometimes things can get very passionate, very combative. But what you realize pretty quickly is they're not fighting against one another. They're fighting for the best idea. And they do so because they have this unbelievably amazing culture, as does UConn women's basketball, of psychological safety, candor, and commitment to excellence. And they know that the only way they're going to do that is they're going to do it together, and they're going to ask each other for help. I think sometimes, though, despite all of this and all the experiences, sometimes just trying to get the words out of our mouth becomes a challenge, okay? In doing it in a way that makes us feel okay here. So sometimes maybe it's okay to trick our brain a little bit into some things. One example of this, and I use this photo of this woman running. She's got a nice smile on her face, and I'm thinking, I don't think I was ever smiling quite that way when I was on a run, but anyway, what I wanted to just share was this. When I was marathon training, and I would have these days, it would be these 20-mile long run days. From time to time, maybe it's a day I wasn't feeling quite 100%. I get to about the 18-mile mark, and I was just kind of done. And I would finish those last 2 miles kind of, by running as far as I could until I couldn't do it anymore. I'd walk for a while, and then I'd run again for a while until I just couldn't do it anymore. And I'd kind of finish the last 2 miles like that. Well, when I was explaining this to a fellow runner, that person said to me, hold on now. We all go through that. I mean, that's, it is what it is. But you're going about the last 2 miles all wrong. He said, next time you do it, I want you to point to a spot run to it and declare victory. Then I want you to walk for a while. And then when you're ready to run, pick another spot out there and run to it and declare victory. The difference between those repeated failures and those repeated wins not only will make it easier to finish the last 2 miles, but you'll leave the run feeling a lot more confident. And I thought, wow, what an amazing thing, right? Just that slight bit of reframing and what that can mean. I think the same holds true when it comes to asking for help. You can say, I need help, which puts the emphasis on you, your need, and it's like help, like I'm drowning, and you've got that whole thing going on in your brain. Or you might express it a different way. I want your help. So it's not just about you anymore. It's about the other person. It's about expressing it as an invitation that they have something to bring to the table that will make whatever it is you're trying to do better because of their involvement. And I think, and again, it's another way to think about what that can mean to the people that you work with, and that expression of confidence and trust in what they do and how they can contribute to the overall goal. So it kind of gets us to this place, right, where I'm hoping that, given a choice between A or B, that you'll see asking for help is a sign of weakness or asking for help is an act of resourcefulness. Obviously, I hope that you will choose B and see it for the act of resourcefulness that it is. And I just find that all of what we've talked about can be so important to, I think, some personal recognition that none of us knows everything. All of us makes mistakes. We have access to a lot of people around here, and it's almost irresponsible not to involve others. Just as a quick review, who you surround yourself with matters, right? The people we surround ourselves with matter a whole lot. 2, the construct of being self-made is an absolute myth. Everybody who's ever done anything and been really successful at it has had help doing it in some way, shape, or form. 3, change your mindset through better framing, right? Be thinking about how might I ask for help in a way that isn't just about me needing help, but you inviting the help of others. That you see asking for help as an act of resourcefulness, and that you also recognize that the power of we begins with you. It begins with each of us. To close out, I want to share a quote from Sekou Andrews, who's a poetic voice out of LA, who I quoted quite a bit in my second book, What Anyone Can Do. And here's what he said. He said, there's an incredible power that comes from surrounding yourself with communities in which you feel small among them, and they look at you like a giant. I think for many of you, let's say you're a TEC Canada member, you probably show up to your first group meeting, you're meeting all these other members, and you're like, whoa, there's a lot of really impressive people around this room. What am I going to bring to the table? And yet it's extraordinary because as they're meeting you and learning about the gifts that you offer, they're thinking, wow, glad you're joining us. You're going to be able to add to this conversation. You're going to be that additional voice we need in some of the more challenging conversations we have in order to make sense of the world, whether that's, again, coming to a decision, meeting a difficult challenge, or exploring a new opportunity. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed our time here together, and have definitely kind of have all new found commitment to successful people asking for help and why that's the case, and how I think we can help others, feel the same way. I certainly encourage you to reach out to TEC Canada if you have any questions. I also encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out to me with any questions if you like as well. And of course, to learn more about Peernovation, please visit us at peernovation.biz. And until next time, just have a great rest of your day. Thank you.